The rancher noticed the Apache girl limping while walking through the sagebrush, then froze when he saw the steel teeth of the bear trap clamped around her ankle. Blood darkened the sand beneath her feet. John Marston pulled his horse to a halt. Dawn light caught the eagle feather in her headband. His chest tightened. Chief Cochise's daughter, the same chief whose war party had taken everything from him 5 years past. Iana looked up. Her dark eyes widened with recognition and terror. She knew his face as well as he knew hers. The stories traveled both ways across the desert. His hand moved to the rifle on his saddle. Old habits, old pain. She spoke in broken English, each word careful and small. Please, not kill Ayana. The morning wind carried dust between them. Neither moved. The trap's metal gleamed with strange markings he didn't recognize, not his brand. Not his traps. Marston dismounted. His boots hit the ground with purpose. The girl flinched but held his gaze. "How long you been caught?" he asked. "Since moon high." She gestured weakly at the sky. "Hours then." Her strength was fading. The trap hadn't bitten deep enough to kill, but desert exposure would finish what it started. He knelt beside the mechanism. The steel was newer than his usual finds. Different maker's mark. Someone had been setting traps on his land without permission. "If Ayana dies here," she whispered, "Father thinks you murder. We'll burn every ranch from here to Tucson." The words hit like cold water. War, real war. Not the small skirmishes that flared and died, but the kind that consumed everything in its path. Marston studied her face. Sweat beaded her forehead despite the cool morning air. Her breathing came shallow and quick. She wasn't lying about the consequences. Cochise would paint the territory red if he found his daughter dead on a white man's property. The sound of hoofbeats broke the silence. Marston looked up to see Sheriff Arthur Morgan riding hard from town, dust plume trailing behind him. Arthur reined in his horse and surveyed the scene. His weathered face showed no surprise, just the tired look of a man who'd seen too much. "Heard your signal shots," Arthur said. "Figured you found trouble. Found more than I bargained for." Marston gestured to Ayana. Arthur's expression darkened. "You know who that is? Cochise's girl." "Things are already heated, John. Found 3 Apache braves dead near the Indian Agency yesterday morning. Dutch Van der Linde's office." Jana's eyes flickered at the name. A quick flash of something. Understanding. Recognition. More than her broken English suggested she should have. Marston caught the look, filed it away. He turned back to the trap. The mechanism was complex but workable. His ranch tools could manage it. "Help me get her free." Arthur shifted in his saddle. "You sure about this? Getting involved means picking a side." "Already involved. She dies here, we're all picking sides whether we want to or not." The truth of it settled between them. Arthur dismounted and fetched the tools from Marston's saddlebags. The work was delicate. The trap had been designed for something smaller than a person, but the steel still held firm. Gianna bit her lip against the pain but didn't cry out. When the jaws finally released, she slumped forward. Marston caught her before she hit the ground. "Can you ride?" he asked. She nodded, though her face had gone pale. Arthur studied the trap mechanism. "This marking. Seen it before on some government supply orders. Government setting traps on my land, or someone with access to government equipment." Arthur's voice carried weight. Implications. They lifted Ayana onto Marston's horse. She sat straight despite her injury. Pride ran deep in her bloodline. "We take her back to her people," Marston said. "Clean slate." "Might not be that simple." Arthur mounted his horse. "Word is Cochise is gathering warriors. Talk of treaty violations. Someone's been stirring things up." The morning sun climbed higher. Heat would come soon, and with it the vultures. They always followed when blood touched the desert sand. As they rode toward Apache territory, Marston noticed how Ayana watched Arthur. How she listened when the sheriff mentioned Dutch's name again. Her English might be broken when she spoke, but her understanding seemed much deeper. The girl was hiding something. In his experience, people only hid things when the truth was more dangerous than deception. Behind them, the trap lay sprung and empty. but Marston could feel larger mechanisms closing around them all. The desert stretched before them, unforgiving and vast. Yana rode behind Marston, her hands steady on the saddle horn. No trembling, no weakness shown. Miles passed in silence before she spoke. Not the broken English from before, but clear words with only the faintest accent. "You are the ghost walker." Marston's shoulders tensed. Arthur looked over sharply. "Don't know what you mean," Marston said. "The food left at our camps. Medicine for the children. My people call you Ghost Walker because you come and go without being seen." Her voice carried certainty. "But I have been watching." The wind picked up, scattering dust across their path. Truth had a way of surfacing when you least wanted it to. "You speak English just fine," Arthur observed. "The missionaries taught me to read and write. My father believed knowledge of your ways would help our survival." She adjusted her grip, favoring her injured ankle. He was right, but not in the way he expected. They crested a ridge. The valley below showed ancient Apache hunting grounds, now crossed with fence lines and cattle trails. Two worlds bleeding into each other. "I was not hunting when the trap caught me," Yana continued. "I was tracking." "Tracking what?" Marston asked. "The men who killed my brothers." The words fell heavy between them. Arthur reined his horse closer. "3 braves found dead near Dutch's office," Arthur said quietly. "Those were your brothers," she nodded. Her jaw tightened with controlled grief. "They discovered something. Someone has been placing traps along our hunting paths, funneling our warriors into specific areas." "Ambush sites," Marston said. "Yes, and more. False signs left at raid locations. Apache arrows planted where our people have never been." Her hands clenched. "Someone wants war between our peoples." Arthur's face darkened. He'd been sheriff long enough to recognize a setup when he saw one. They stopped to rest the horses by a dried creek bed. Yana slipped down carefully, testing her injured ankle. The bleeding had stopped, but the wound would need proper tending. From beneath her deerskin shirt, she pulled a leather-bound ledger. The pages were filled with neat handwriting and columns of numbers. "I took this the night my brothers died, from Dutch van der Linde's office." Arthur reached for the book. His eyes scanned the entries, supply requisitions, payroll records. But the numbers didn't match any government accounting he knew. "These supplies," Arthur said, pointing to a page, "they're supposed to go to the reservation. But they are being sold in town. I have watched the wagons. Government grain goes to private buyers. Blankets meant for our elders end up in trading posts." Marston studied the ledger over Arthur's shoulder. The scope of the theft was staggering. Months of systematic robbery from people who had almost nothing to begin with. "There's more," Yana said. She turned to a section marked with pressed flowers, a code of some kind. "Names and payments. Men hired to wear Apache clothing, to attack ranches and leave evidence of our presence." The pieces fell together with sickening clarity. False flag operations. Create the problem, then profit from the solution. "Dutch gets rich selling reservation supplies," Arthur said slowly, "then pays men to dress up and attack settlers, which justifies calling in cavalry to remove us from our remaining lands," Yana finished. "Lands that happen to sit on the planned railroad route." The sun climbed higher. Heat shimmered off the rocks around them. In the distance, dusk clouds marked the horizon, riders coming fast. "They know you have the ledger," Marston said. "The trap was meant for me specifically. Dutch discovered I had been watching, learning." She tucked the book back inside her shirt. "My brothers died trying to warn our father. Now that burden falls to me." Arthur stood and checked his rifle. The dust clouds were closer now. Too many riders for a casual patrol. "How many men does Dutch have on his payroll?" Marston asked. "Enough." Yana moved to the horses despite her injury. "And they know this country almost as well as we do." They mounted quickly. The terrain ahead offered both opportunity and danger. Canyon country meant places to hide, but also places to get trapped. As they rode, Marston found himself watching Iyana's hands, how she held the reins, how she read the landscape for signs. Her brothers had taught her well before they died. "Why leave food at our camps?" she asked suddenly. The question hung in the air between them. Marston kept his eyes on the trail ahead. Lost my wife and boy 5 years back. Apache raid. His voice stayed level, matter of fact. Figured maybe if folks weren't starving, there'd be less reason to fight. You fed your enemies. Fed hungry people. There's a difference. Behind them, the dust clouds had separated into individual riders. Professional trackers closing ground with purpose. Iana pointed toward a narrow canyon entrance. There is shelter ahead, but once we enter, there is only one way out. Then we better make sure we can defend it, Arthur said. They spurred their horses toward the canyon mouth. The rock walls would provide cover, but they would also prevent escape if things went badly. As they rode into the shadows between the stone walls, Marston realized they had crossed a line. No longer just helping an injured stranger. Now they were protecting a witness, harboring evidence that could prevent a war. The ledger pressed against Iana's chest held the power to expose Dutch's conspiracy, but only if they could keep her alive long enough to present it to the right people. The canyon closed around them, shelter and trap combined. The ghost of ancient waters had carved this place, patient and relentless. Now it would test whether truth could survive in a land built on lies. The canyon walls pressed close around them, ancient stone carved by water that hadn't flowed here in decades. Gianna guided them along a hidden path her people had used for generations. Behind them, horses' hooves echoed off rock. Dutch's men had found their trail. How many? Marston asked. Arthur peered back through the narrow opening. 6, maybe 7. They climbed higher along ledges barely wide enough for their mounts. Iana moved with certainty despite her injury, every step calculated, every turn chosen for maximum advantage. There, she pointed to a shelf of rock overlooking the main canyon floor. We can see them coming from there. They dismounted and led their horses up the final slope. The position offered clear views of the approaches but limited escape routes, all or nothing ground. Arthur checked his ammunition. His face had taken on the hard lines of a man preparing for violence, but something else worked behind his eyes. Doubt eating at old certainties. Known Dutch for 15 years, he said quietly, taught me everything about law enforcement. Men change, Marston replied, or maybe they just show who they always were. Below them, riders entered the canyon. Professional movements, military precision. These weren't typical hired guns. Yana crouched behind a boulder, the ledger pressed against her chest. Some of those men wear cavalry uniforms. Arthur's jaw tightened. Dutch has soldiers on his payroll too. The corruption ran deeper than any of them had imagined. Not just theft and false flags, but active military participation in the conspiracy. One of the riders called out. His voice echoed off stone walls. We know you're up there, Arthur. Dutch wants to talk. Arthur stood slowly. Marston grabbed his arm. Could be a trap. Everything's a trap now. Arthur shook him off. But I need to hear what he has to say. Dutch himself rode into view, still wearing the respectable suit of a government official, still carrying himself with the authority of his position. Arthur, my boy. You've made some poor choices today. The words carried fatherly disappointment. The tone a master uses with a disobedient student. Found some interesting reading material, Dutch. Arthur held up papers they'd copied from the ledger. Government supplies getting sold to private buyers. Funny how that works. Dutch urged his horse closer. The other riders spread out, covering potential escape routes. That's a complicated situation. Nuances you don't understand. Dutch's voice remained calm, reasonable. Step away from those people and we can discuss this properly. These people have names, and they've got proof you've been stealing from the reservation. Proof? Dutch smiled. Cold edge behind the expression. You mean the word of a savage girl against a federal agent. We both know how that story ends. Iana rose from behind her boulder, the ledger visible in her hands. The books tell a different story than your words, Agent Van der Linde. Dutch's mask slipped for just a moment. Calculation replacing false warmth. Miss, I'm afraid you're mistaken about what you think you found. Accounting can be very confusing for someone without proper education. My education seems adequate to understand theft and conspiracy. The standoff stretched taut, men with guns facing each other across ancient stone. The canyon held their words and threw them back as echoes. Arthur pulled out a small metal badge, Federal Marshal, not Sheriff. Already sent copies of that ledger to Washington, Dutch, along with my own observations about supply discrepancies. Dutch's composure cracked. You betrayed me, after everything I taught you. You taught me to uphold justice. Guess I learned too well. The hired guns looked between their employer and the federal marshal, loyalties wavering as the true scope of the situation became clear. Nobody needs to die today, Arthur continued. Surrender now and maybe Washington shows mercy. Dutch's laugh echoed hollow off the rocks. Mercy? You think exposing this operation shows mercy to anyone? He gestured broadly at the canyon, the desert beyond. This land is dying, Arthur. The Apache are finished whether I help it along or not. At least my way, some good comes of their ending. Whose good? Yana asked. Yours or theirs? Progress benefits everyone eventually. Tell that to my brothers. The words hung sharp in the desert air, truth cutting through justification and rationalization. One of Dutch's hired men lowered his rifle, then another. They'd signed on for easy money, not war crimes. Dutch saw his support crumbling. Desperation replaced calculation in his eyes. You have no idea what you're destroying, he snarled. The railroad deal alone would bring thousands of jobs, prosperity for everyone. Built on stolen land with stolen supplies, Marston said. That's not prosperity, that's just theft with better publicity. Dutch's hand moved toward his weapon. Arthur read the intention and stepped forward. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Hard? Dutch's voice rose. You've already made it impossible. The canyon walls seemed to lean inward, ancient stone witnessing another moment when violence balanced on the edge of words. Dutch looked around at his remaining supporters. The few who still held their weapons looked uncomfortable, uncertain. This isn't over, he said finally. That ledger won't be enough, not against the word of a federal agent with 15 years of service. Maybe not, Arthur agreed, but it's a start. Dutch wheeled his horse around. His remaining men followed, leaving only dust and echoes in their wake. But Marston knew retreating enemies were often more dangerous than advancing ones. Cornered men made desperate choices. The canyon felt larger with Dutch gone, but no safer. Storms always seemed calmest right before they turned deadly. Jiana tucked the ledger away. He will not give up easily. No, Arthur agreed. He'll regroup, find another angle. They gathered their horses and prepared to leave the canyon, but each of them understood the real confrontation still lay ahead. Truth was only powerful if people lived long enough to tell it. Apache territory spread before them under the afternoon sun. Smoke from cooking fires rose straight in the still air. Children's voices carried across the valley until they spotted the approaching riders. Then silence fell complete. Warriors emerged from the shadows between lodges, rifles held ready but not yet aimed. Chief Cochise stepped forward, his weathered face unreadable as stone. Jiana dismounted carefully. Her injured ankle held her weight but barely. She approached her father with the formal dignity their situation demanded. Father, I bring news of my brother's deaths. Cochise's eyes moved from his daughter to the two white men behind her. His gaze lingered longest on Marston. The ghost walker shows his face at last. Marston felt the weight of dozens of warriors watching him. Men who had lost family to people who looked exactly like him. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. You know who I am, Marston said. My scouts have watched you for months. Food left at our camps. Medicine for our sick. We wondered at your purpose. Lost my own family. Figured maybe if folks weren't starving, there'd be less killing. The chief studied him with eyes that had seen too much war and not enough peace. Iana pulled out the ledger. The leather binding caught sunlight as she opened it to the marked pages. My brothers discovered this. The Indian agent has been stealing our supplies and paying men to attack ranches while wearing our clothing. She handed the book to her father. Cochise read slowly, his expression darkening with each page. Around them, the warriors shifted restlessly. Word spread quickly through the camp. Wives and mothers gathered close enough to hear. Everyone understood the implications. Dutch van der Linde profits from our hunger, Cochise said finally, and then profits again from the war that hunger creates. Arthur stepped forward. The federal marshal's badge caught the light on his shirt. I've sent copies to Washington, but Dutch still has support among the cavalry. Could take months for justice to work through proper channels. Months we may not have, the chief replied. His men told my warriors that you kidnapped Ayanna. Some of my young men want immediate action. As if summoned by his words, dust clouds appeared on the horizon, riders approaching fast from the direction of town. Dutch returned with reinforcements, more cavalry uniforms among them now, the conspiracy reaching deeper into official ranks than any of them had imagined. Stand down, Arthur, Dutch's voice carried across the open ground. You're harboring stolen government property and interfering with official business. Behind him rode a full cavalry unit, 20 armed soldiers following orders from their commanding officer, men who believed they were upholding law and order. Arthur walked forward to meet them. His marshal's badge reflected sunlight directly into Dutch's eyes. Only stolen property here is in that ledger, along with evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud and murder. The cavalry captain rode up beside Dutch, young face marked by military certainty and inexperience with complex situations. Sir, we have orders to retrieve stolen government documents and arrest those interfering with Indian agency operations. Captain, Arthur said calmly, I'm a federal marshal investigating charges of corruption against Agent van der Linde. These people are witnesses under my protection. The captain looked between the two authority figures. His training hadn't prepared him for competing jurisdictions and conflicting orders. Behind them, more riders appeared, but these wore different uniforms. Federal marshals with arrest warrants signed in Washington. Dutch saw his support crumbling. His own hired guns had already abandoned him. Now federal authority was turning against him as well. You destroyed everything, Dutch snarled at Arthur. Years of work, progress for everyone. Progress built on lies isn't progress, Arthur replied. It's just more sophisticated theft. The federal marshals moved forward with practiced efficiency. No violence, no dramatic confrontation, just men doing their jobs with quiet professionalism. Dutch submitted to arrest with bitter dignity. His conspiracy collapsed not in gunfire but in paperwork and proper procedure. The cavalry captain read through copies of the evidence. His face grew pale as the scope of the deception became clear. Sir, I apologize. We were given false information about the situation here. Happens more than it should, Arthur replied. But you can help make it right. Over the following weeks, the truth emerged in testimony and evidence. Dutch's network of corruption reached into multiple agencies, but exposure began the slow work of justice. Marston found himself returning to Apache territory regularly, not as the ghost walker leaving supplies in secret, but as a neighbor working toward honest peace. Ayanna helped translate between worlds. Her education became a bridge where there had only been misunderstanding before. Arthur took over the Indian agency, ensuring supplies reached their intended recipients. The job paid less than corruption had, but he slept better at night. The bear traps were collected from across the territory. Apache metalworkers melted them down and forged them into farming tools. Instruments of harm transformed into implements of growth. Months later, Marston taught Ayanna the finer points of cattle ranching, while she showed him Apache methods of reading weather patterns and tracking game. Two peoples who had been enemies learned to see each other as neighbors. Not perfect neighbors, but honest ones willing to work at coexistence. The desert hadn't changed, still harsh, still unforgiving to the careless and cruel, but the people living on it had found ways to share its burden instead of adding to it. Sometimes the greatest enemy wasn't the one you expected, Marston reflected. watching Apache children play alongside settler families at a shared harvest celebration. And the greatest ally wasn't either. Truth had a way of revealing itself when people were willing to look past old prejudices and convenient lies. Justice moved slowly, but it moved. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.